Representative Jerald Raymond. How are you, sir?
Doing very well. Thank you, Matt. It's good to be here.
Good to have you here finally. And again,
Thank
we've had this lined up a couple times. You are a busy, busy guy. We're at the end of the session, but man, we're just a couple weeks away.
Well, and you're a patient guy. Thanks for accommodating me.
Absolutely. It's this legislative session. I'm not in politics. I've never covered a legislative session. This has been so wild to see. This is how the sausage is made. These are the problems and solutions and struggles that Idaho has been working through forever that make it the state it is, for better or for worse. But like, this is it. It has been so incredible to see this.
Well, I'm glad that you've taken the opportunity, and it's been a pleasure for me to get to know you.
Yeah.
And how we got to know one another actually has been a real pleasure. I have to say that the best legislation, in my opinion, the best legislation is generated by citizens who come forward with an idea or a need, and we work through that process of formulating a solution to that challenge, whatever it might be. So thanks for being part of the solution, part of the process.
Well, we weren't part of the process. Oh, not part of the solution. Although I did, obviously in the bill that, you and I worked on was S-1070, which dealt with educating parents in the state of Idaho when the state of Idaho presents children with an internet-based piece of technology. And, I still think it's the right thing to do, but it is really interesting. It's like, look, this is really complex. But one thing that I really wanted to make sure when we brought that bill forward is that I'm bringing a problem and I have a solution. And, it's just very interesting to see how involved it is. It's like, do you have fiscal impacts? What are the obligations? Are we keeping people's data secure? Are we overstepping as a state? Are we, meeting all our obligations? Like all of these different things, like, wow, man, good thing this is not my full-time job, because I am missing the mark on
Well, and the steps that you take, I mean,
right.
I don't think our folks at home really realize that the majority of the work, the heavy lifting is done in committees, and it's redundant. I mean, you do heavy lifting in a committee, you get the support of that committee. That support has to be regenerated and built upon on the floor, in the chamber of the House of Representatives or the Senate, whichever the case may be. Then you start that process all over it on the opposite, on the other side of the rotunda, and you build that consensus in a Senate committee. And then on the Senate floor, and all that has to happen before it reaches the governor's desk and he signs it into law. So,
and then he still has to agree to sign it into law.
Exactly.
Right.
And so you start building a consensus early on, and it's not just your friends that you sit next to. It's friends that you don't sit next to, plus friends on the other side of the rotunda.
Right.
And then you have to keep the governor in the loop all the way through to make sure that it's something that he will support in the end. So.
And you know what's interesting about the entire process too? It is the exact opposite of what we all inherently want to do, which is talk to people that are going to agree with us and believe that our idea is a great idea. You got to take it to people that hate it and want to beat the living hell out of it. But this is at the core of, again, working with SAT kids, I would always talk to them about, they come in, it's like, did you get your homework done? It's like, no, I couldn't because I can't. And they go through this whole big, list of lies and nonsense. And we would get into conversations about what the value of being honest is, and specifically the value of being honest with yourself, right? Because at the end of the day, if you can get somebody else to agree with you, that's great. But if you know you're lying, then you're setting yourself up for this train wreck of a life. Yeah. And God help you if you you can know you're lying and operate in a larger, complex corporate mechanism where it's like you can kind of hide your fibs, you can kind of get away. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to do something out in the world and people that don't know you and don't care about you have to agree with you and value what you're doing, you cannot lie to yourself. Like your own observation of the holes and the benefits, the pros, the cons, all of that is so absolutely necessary to persuade other people at the end of the day and have a functional action in the world, be it a business model or a legislation or whatever it might be. But dude, you got to go after the people, like, listen, this person will probably agree with me, but that person I know is going to, I better find out what they're going to say. And then of course you take all of the vitriol and they're like, this is trash, whatever. And you're like, okay, parse it out. Was there a piece of truth in all of these terrible things they said? And if there's a piece of truth, great, fix that. And if there's not, you got to be able to wipe it off and keep going.
Exactly. You're so right on that issue. Absolutely.
What a funny thing.
Yeah. And good pieces of legislation oftentimes take many iterations.
Sure.
Sometimes more than 1 year.
Sure.
Sometimes more than 2 years. I've got pet pieces of legislation that I haven't succeeded with yet, but I'm still working on them.
Oh, if you can divulge, like, what are those
absolutely.
pieces? Yeah, help me understand.
So I'm trying really hard to keep vape products out of the hands of minors, out of our high school kids, and under grade school kids, junior high kids. If I could figure a way to keep those addictive products out of our kids' hands, that I'd do it tomorrow. But I haven't found the solution yet, and we're still working on it.
You may be interested to know the educational platform that I gave to the state of Idaho that was about to be part of the law that we were passing has
Senate Bill 1070. Yes.
Senate Bill 1070.
Yep.
That platform that I presented to the state for free that would educate parents about tech awareness also has a vaping video on it. That has Central District Health had sent somebody in, and we did this incredible conversation on vaping products. And we went over EVOLI, we went over all of the different concentrations of the vaping products, we went over the marketing mechanisms, we went over all kinds of things. And amazingly, that went out last spring. And amazingly, on 4th of July, I'm walking through my neighborhood, and this guy stops me who I had never met. And he said, "Matt." I was like, "Yes." He said, "I watched your vaping video. I stopped that day." Now, this is a grown man with children, a wife, a house, functional. He watched that and he went cold turkey. And that is a video that may one day be in the hands of all Idaho parents to help them understand the dangers as well.
Am I glad we landed on this conversation today?
Yeah.
We, to the speaker's credit and to the pro temp's credit, we had an interim committee that started last fall. Late last summer, in fact. We met in September, October, and November. And we brought people in and they testified on the pros and cons and all, we received public testimony and all that stuff. I really thought we'd landed on a spot where we could move forward with some legislation that would help. And ultimately, we haven't succeeded yet this session. So, but one of the things that we learned in that process was the education piece that comes through our public school system, from our health districts, and from Idaho Public Television. It's a partnership, and we've got we've got some funding sources that we may tap into in the future. But knowing that you've done something and that's valuable, I really want to at some point pick your brain and work harder on this topic.
We got to get it. One of the big things that I was very blown away about when I got educated on this topic, and again, nowhere near as educated as some of the other experts, but just understanding what it did, it's like, listen, this is something that, like, I've never smoked cigarettes. Okay. I did have, like, back in the day when I turned 18, I went to the drugstore, or there was a cigar shop, right? And I turned 18. I'm like, I'm 18. I'm going to go buy a cigar. I'm terrible with cigars, by the way. Like, I wish I could be the guy who like drank and smoked cigars every night, like all classy, but that's not me. Anyway, so I go and get the cigar and I smoke I'm like, give me the biggest cigar you have. Like, I have some kind of Looney Tune vision in my head of like this, like anyway. And it was like, okay, that's a bad idea. My mouth tastes like an ashtray and I don't have a palate for this. I don't have an appreciation. Okay, great. I'm out. But that kind of negative feedback loop and damage done, it's like, okay, I'm not meaningfully damaged by, smoking some good cigars, right? Or trying to smoke cigars as an 18-year-old. I'm not saying it was great for me, but I'm not hurt by it. When you're dealing with vape products, you actually can do lasting, meaningful damage in your experimentation with these things. The nicotine concentrations are so high that you'd have to smoke like a pack of cigarettes to get the exact same equivalent. You have nicotine concentrations that cause seizures, that cause instantaneous lung damage. You have nicotine concentrations that are available over the counter for people to purchase that are like unbelievably damaging in the initial experimentation with this.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And on top of that, some of these products are laced with deadly levels of fentanyl and other things, and how they get in there, I don't know. But we did have some testimony from a coroner in Idaho that shared a tragic story of a young person that lost their life because of the overdose of fentanyl in a vape product. And it's just tragic.
One additional problem, even aside, or kind of what you're touching on, is the delivery mechanism of the chemical is an innocuous, like you got a pen or you got a little,
Right.
cartridge or something, whatever it might be. So you have this delivery mechanism, but then what you plug into that delivery mechanism varies from something that, let's say, the most innocuous, low concentration nicotine product that everybody would say like, okay, this is, quote, fine, right? Like this falls in within FDA regulations, whatever. But you can switch out the chemicals in there for exactly what you're talking about. So you can take the cartridge mechanism that goes onto the delivery system and you can put in things like fentanyl, things like THC, things like concentrations of nicotine that cause massive damage. And because everybody has been desensitized to the delivery mechanism, and you're like, oh, you're just plugging in this cartridge. That cartridge could be a deadly chemical and you don't know.
You don't know it. Yep. That's exactly right. And when you talk about these substances like THC and nicotine, some of those are synthetic and not the same as they were 10 years ago even.
Right.
They're way more powerful. They're way more addictive. They're way more harmful. And so education, in my opinion, is the key. We talk a little bit about regulation. We talk about pricing that out of the reach of our youth. But the real key, in my opinion, is education and helping young people understand the risks,
right,
and how it will affect them for the rest of their lives.
There's also a problem with, obviously, once the vaping has become popularized, especially with younger people, there's a black market around the vaping. And that's where you get the illicit substances, but that's also where you get people using children on campuses as essentially, quote unquote, dealers for these things. And some of the school districts that I communicated with in distributing the safety program were explaining problems that they had off of school technology with people using that, then getting, essentially being used to traffic these products throughout schools and everything. Like, it's such a mess.
So, and you've hit on something that's really, really sensitive to me. As we got digging into this, we realized that regulating the legal path is not very effective, because those that are selling it at retail and even at wholesale are doing a pretty good job of regulating.
Sure.
Within the bounds of the law. It's the black market stuff that we're talking about. That, how do you get your arms around that? How do you figure that out? How do you slow that process down and find out how to keep it out of the hands of our kids? So
right.
I'm really intrigued by what you've learned in this process and how we can move forward.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to hit on that. So that's one of your pet projects.
That is one of my pet projects.
What else you got for me?
Well, anything agriculture, that's kind of, it's interesting. In the Capitol, we all come as legislators, we all come from various backgrounds, and we come with the experiences that we have. And that's what makes us unique. It's what makes it good. And it's what makes a really great citizen legislature, is we each have our own unique industries and backgrounds. Yeah. And it's fun. It's fun to sit on the ag committee and listen to attorneys' point of view.
Fun is not a word I would anticipate you'd say.
No, but it is. It really is. And you've interviewed him, Representative Schertz.
Sure.
What a great resource to the ag, to the ag industry and the ag community.
He brought me a sheep pelt. He was in here just last week, and he comes from a wool growing family and everything. Exactly. And his uncle's, I think, the #1 wool grower and sheep guy in the state. He brought me this beautiful product. It was great.
So he comes with that background.
Yes.
I mean, that's the way he was raised.
Yeah.
And yet he chose a professional path that gives him a different perspective on lots of things. And it's valuable. It is extremely valuable. So he's not, I mean, I just bring that up because he's the one that came into my mind.
Yeah.
But everybody else comes with their own unique, experiences and backgrounds. And
leading up to this legislative session, I had done probably at least a half dozen interviews on water. So I spoke in May with TJ Budge, the attorney who was representing the pump farmers. I spoke with Paul Arrington, the president of the Water Users Association. I spoke with Dean Stevens, Jeff Raybold, and Brian Olmstead from the
Water
Board and their appointed members. Kayla Golden, fantastic Department of Water Resource. Cynthia Bridge Clark, as well as, come on, Idaho Power. Come on. I got this one. Krista Davis.
Okay.
There it is. All of these people talking about water in the state of Idaho. And again, coming into this session, I was anticipating, it was like, because it had dominated so many episodes and all interesting stuff. I never felt like I was repeating things with people. They were bringing in different concepts of, Anderson Ranch, prior appropriation, like all of these different things. I was expecting water to really dominate, especially considering the state of our fires and drought and everything, dominate this legislative session, but it really didn't pop up that much.
Which is interesting. I actually thought it would too. But I will tell you that the agreement that the farmers in the Upper Valley and farmers in the Lower Valley made, talking about the Snake River Valley, it was essential that those folks made those agreements. I felt like there was probably 2 or 3 things that we would need to codify in those agreements. I think the major thing was the funding to help support the agreement that they made. And it's taken a while. Here we are in almost the 11th hour of the session, and we're now getting to those things, and it's taken some time to percolate and get those agreement or those the language in those pieces of legislation right, so that we can address them properly.
Do you have confidence that we are on a sustainable path for our water in Idaho?
I do, actually. I think we are on a sustainable path. I think we have the supply. What we need is the ability to manage it properly. And as long as we do that, and I believe we can, then I think we're in a good spot.
There's been a lot of conversation about federal cuts to the state of Idaho with DOGE coming through. Obviously, Department of Water Resource lost 40% of their hydrologists. That's 4 out of 10. That's a big, you're almost 50% of the people. We are not going to solve this problem with less information, right? We need research. We need data. We need help understanding these hyper complex hydro systems. Do you think the $30 million that Governor Little asked for in his budget to support the Department of Water Resource and the research that we need, do you think that is going to be sufficient to really start paving the way for, like, okay, we're getting more information. With more information, we can do more appropriate management, and we will be able to supply everyone with what they need?
So, Matt, I do think that it's going to be sufficient as long as we can keep it ongoing. I think one of the critical pieces is that, there was some suggestion that we could do it one time, but with the shared resource that water is, I liken it to our transportation system. We don't stop planning. We don't stop funding. It's an ongoing process, and water is not a lot different. There are going to be ongoing needs for projects, for planning, for designing, for engineering, and those kinds of things. And to get that where it needs to be, we've got to have that funding ongoing. And thankfully, last Friday, we had a piece of legislation that passed through the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee that, with intent language, that money will be ongoing. And if there's ever a point where we don't need that, then obviously we can address it then. But until then, we need enough money in the pipeline that we can have projects in the pipeline. And these projects aren't cheap. They're not inexpensive projects. We have got to build out recharge sites, aquifer recharge sites, and we've got to build out additional storage in the Upper Valley where it's the most meaningful, where it'll have the greatest impact on the state and on the aquifer, those types of things. So,
and to your point, when you're talking recharge, these recharge sites that are required, you have two different primary mechanisms. One is just a seeping gravel pit, right? And you're talking, like 40, 50, 60 acres or larger of just area where water is pooled into it and then gravity pulls it down. You also have specialized well recharge and well injection sites. And that's a smaller area that has literally a direct pipeline down to the aquifer, which carries a lot of problems with it. Because naturally, if you let water seep down 500 feet or, whatever, through gravel and whatnot, you have this beautiful natural filtration mechanism. But if you do an injection well, you carry whatever's on the surface directly down into the bottle that everybody's pulling from the straws. And that sounds like a great option in that we can get the water down there really, really fast and we don't have to wait. The problem is obviously we need information. We need safety. We need cleanliness. We need to assure the water that's going down is not mixed with biochemicals or it doesn't have, certain diseases that might exist on the surface. And these are all really intense considerations. When you're talking about increasing storage in the upper, I mean, you talk about Anderson Ranch, right? We're increasing that by 6 feet to the tune of what, like $20-30 million?
Yeah, it's expensive. Yeah. I don't remember the exact dollar number, but it's not cheap. And we just had a memorial that passed in our body yesterday. Well, it was in resources committee meeting yesterday, talking about the rebuilding of the Teton Dam. Now, you weren't here when that dam broke.
Was that 76?
76, yeah, June 5th, 76. So,
do you think that's going to happen? Because that was pretty much like the last dam. They're like, hey, let's figure something else out.
Yes.
If you wouldn't mind, could you give background on this? Because I've heard the story, but a lot of people listening may not have.
Well, that dam was built on the Teton River, just above St. Anthony, above Newdale, actually, in East Idaho. I was about 20 years old when that dam burst, and lived through it. Our family survived it, although it was an experience that we don't want to have again. There was a lot of assets that we had that were lost. We lost cattle, and we lost farm ground. The last thing I did before I left our home that evening was throw my guns on my mattress, and it floated to the ceiling, and that's where it got pinned and saved my guns. But that's really basically all I had left of my personal possessions when we got back to the house. The next morning, that happened on a Saturday at about noon. Sunday morning, I borrowed a neighbor's rowboat and rowed exactly a mile to my parents' home. So it was an experience that we don't want to have to relive, obviously. But I think if it's engineered correctly, I think it can be rebuilt, and I think it would be a great thing for the Upper Valley to have a place we could store some water and release it when we needed it. It was originally built, if my memory serves me correctly, it was originally built for flood control, because that river can get out of hand when in the spring runoff. But it flows down and dumps into the Snake River, just west of Rexburg. So anyway, that's the history. But even if we just half built that dam, half the reservoir, just half as high as it was, it would give us enough cushion that we could solve some shortage problems downstream when we have calls.
To be very transparent with you, I did not know that you had any personal experience with that.
Oh, really?
Yep. No. If I may ask, like, how much warning did you have? Because it was literally like almost immediately once it filled, it failed.
Yeah, well, it broke at about noon, which is very fortunate, because had it failed in the middle of the night, there would have been a lot of life loss. We were far enough down the valley that it's kind of a wide valley as it opens up, and we kind of felt like that by the time it got to our place, which is about 20-25 miles downriver, that it would be pretty well contained, but it was not contained. There was a lot more water there than anybody imagined. I was spraying grain, and my parents were out of town. They'd gone to a wedding in Salt Lake, and so I went to my grandpa and I said, "Grandpa, what do you think we ought to do? Should I keep spraying, or should I quit? Because there may be some things we need to get kind of prepared for." And he says, "Oh, as wide as this valley is, I think we'll be fine. I don't think we'll see more than, I think it'll probably be back in the river by the time it gets to us." Well, it wasn't back in the river time it got to us. It was devastating. And it wasn't just the depth. It was the velocity, how fast that water was moving as it came through. And it was just an interesting experience to have had, and hopefully never have it again.
Did you receive a phone? Like, this is before text message. I mean, like,
It
did
came
you
across the
receive a phone
news.
call?
It just
Okay.
came across the news.
Gotcha.
The 12 o'clock news at home at that time was the big deal. And it, I think if my memory serves me correctly, the dam broke like at 12:05 or 12:10 or 12:15, something like that. And that came as a headline on the new news. And obviously people started talking and people started reacting. And it doesn't take long for news to travel, that kind of news to travel. So,
And once you heard about it, obviously you had a decision to make. When did you wait until you saw water coming your way?
no, we didn't wait that long, but I think I was probably 1 o'clock or something to that effect when I was talking to my grandpa. I went back to work and just kept spraying grain until about 5 or 6 o'clock that evening. And then it started to get really serious. Then we realized that things were real. And then we started opening gates and let cattle out, let them go wherever they could go to get out of the way. And at that point, just at dusk, you heard some very eerie sounds. You could hear like trees, the sound of trees tipping over. You could hear fences stretching, those kinds of things. And at that point, you knew that the things were really, really serious. And so we basically just opened gates and let cattle go where they could go. And then we went for higher ground and then came back the next morning to a site that I will never forget.
I had no idea. I'm so happy that, you survived and your family survived.
Well, thank you. And
No. So even with that haunting memory, you don't have an objection to some portion of that being built back up.
I don't. I think that we've learned so much in the last 40 plus years
Right.
that we can get that thing built back right. And I have a lot of confidence, and the need is so great. The population of our state has grown tremendously since then, and we need the water. We need the resource, and we need to be able to capture it and manage it, use it when we need it.
You know what I'm worried about? I believe everything you're saying.
That
Let me be really clear.
That worries you?
No. You know what I worry about is that we have this history in Idaho. We do. You're a part of it. You're a living piece of this. You had to you evacuated because of this mass tragedy. And I worry that if we don't do a better job capturing this history, this Idaho history, it will be gone. It will necessarily be gone because you have people like me moving here who don't know anything about this. I don't remember the Anderson Dam bursting. I don't have family members.
The Teton.
Excuse me, Teton.
Yeah.
Teton.
Yeah.
I don't remember these things, right? And I imagine I could talk to people all day long, every single day about these seminal moments in Idaho history, these real guiding memories, and we'd never get through it, right? I worry about that because it is one of those things that if we don't understand the history of the state, we won't understand the trajectory, or we won't understand why people are doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
That's a concern of mine.
Yeah. Well, it's a valid concern. And that's why we like to share with our children or grandchildren.
Yeah.
And hopefully they capture the value of life's experience.
Yeah.
Yep.
Representative, I've had you here for a while. We've talked water, we've talked vaping. Is there, and I'd love to have you back, but I try to not keep you too long. Is there any other topic that you want to cover that the legislature has hit this year, or that you're looking forward to getting back after potentially next year?
No, not that I can think of off the top of my head. I just want to make sure that I emphasize that what we do here, we do it for a very specific purpose, and that is, my wife and I have 6 married kids, and we have 25 grandkids, and they all live in Idaho. So, and they're multi-generation. My great grandfather came here in the early 1900s, and so that makes my grandkids, multi-generational Idahoans, and we want them to appreciate what you appreciate now and not lose that, not lose the quality of life, the value of life, the what we believe in as a people, our freedoms, the ability to worship, the ability to have choices. It's just so important that we preserve that for our kids. That's why we do what we do.
Yeah, this seems to be Idaho seems to be getting forced into the spotlight at a national level. And I have my own opinions. To be really honest, I think it's being portrayed both positive and negative really aggressively by a lot of different interested parties. Because everything I've seen here is, for the most part, very practical. That's not to say I agree with everything that comes through. And there's some bills this session where I'm like, wow, that's crazy.
And where did it come from?
Yeah. And you're right. And the other things about it are, I see people that have been around for a little bit and they're like, listen, man, it's not going to even get a hearing. Like, don't worry. And people really know. It's like, listen, crazy things come out, or seemingly crazy things come out. And most of them are, commentary or, campaign stuff that people know is never going to make. Some things are persuaded by, outside political organizations that they just want to say like, hey, I got this bill, at least, an RS and what. But the things that actually pass, I was speaking with, Representative Monks about this a couple of weeks ago. He said, look at what we do. Don't get caught into the weeds about what bill came forward. But he's like, look at the bills that both parties pass and get signed by the government. That's what you need to focus on, what Idaho's doing. And Idaho just gets portrayed. I think some people really love to say, look at how terrible Idaho is. It's just a state full of these terrible people. They're doing these terrible things. They don't care about women. They don't care about kids. They don't care about education. Meanwhile, we have like fantastic education results, especially bang for the buck, all of these things. And it's so difficult to triangulate and really understand what Idaho is, right? It's really, really hard. But again, conversations like this, it makes it a little bit easier.
So I appreciate that. And let's go back to where we started in this conversation, a few minutes ago. I think the important thing for me is to get home I go home every week. And I tell people, kind of jokingly, but not jokingly, that I go home and I get dirt under my fingernails so that I can come back here and make good decisions. And I think that we need to think about what's going on. We can get wrapped around the axle really quick when you walk in the Capitol building, and I do that with reverence and awe. I mean, I every time I walk in that building, I think of the huge responsibility that's mine as I sit in that seat and as I push the button to vote on pieces of legislation. But at the same time, you can get wrapped up really quickly in the emotion, in the workings of the process, those kinds of things. But we need to get home every twice in a while and listen to our constituents, who so many of them are just living their lives. They're going to work every day. They're paying their taxes. They're being good neighbors. They have such good family values. It's their needs, the needs of the people at home, that we need to be fulfilling here. It's not our own needs. It's not the needs of outside forces. It's not the needs of others. It's the needs of our constituents at home that we need to fulfill. And some of those needs are to bring legislation that helps them, and some of those needs are to prevent legislation that may hurt them. So I think we need to keep all of that in mind as we go through this process.
Representative Raymond, I appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming in today. Let's absolutely do this again.
Okay. Appreciate it.